Are you still confused with the ego? Sometimes you ask the question, is that really me who wants this, or is it the ego? In this video, I want to cover this distinction as we already covered in the past video, what awareness is, consciousness, the self, or what we call I, our true self. So now we're going to cover what the ego is and how does it look in our experience as we investigate through the direct path what we are or who we are. Now, the first thing that I want to say is that in my own vocabulary, the ego takes sometimes a couple of different terms. One of them is the separate self. And the reason why we call it the separate self is because its own feeling of identity is one of separation. It feels like it is an individual thing in a world, and that is an individual agent, an independent agent of reality. And so because of this, we create this idea that I need things, I must complete myself, I must achieve great things, and so on. We start to think that we are a product of the environment, and so we are in competition with the environment. That's what creates the sense of a separate self. Again, it makes sense because its own essence is to feel separate. It creates its identity based on perceptions, which are always limited. And so his or its own existence depends on limitations. Now here's the thing, the reason why it always feels in scarcity or in lack is because subconsciously or unconsciously it knows that it is full and complete, but it doesn't perceive itself that way, and so it looks for completion. Everything is looking for unity, for completion, for wholeness. That's where we get the word holy, right? So we are already whole, and we need to realize that. That's what the separate self could never, ever realize because its own existence depends on perceptions. That's why we call it the separate self. However, the separate self, when we look for it, we can never find it. All we find is a thought or a narrative, but we never find any separate self. If we look at the body, we just feel sensations. That's it. So whether we look in the body or in the mind, we never find this separate self. The other word that is used a little bit deeper in my own teaching and other direct path teachings is the I thought, because it's no longer an identity based on a specific entity, but rather an identity based on memory, based on narratives. Notice that you could never ever suffer. You would never be able to have a depression or an anxiety without thoughts. Because the one that is having the anxiety or the depression or any other mental state is that I thought, I this, I did that, that happened to me, and so on. There is always an I-centered. That's why we call it selfishness, self-centered thought. It's about me and all that happened to me, or all that I need to do, and all the resentment and the vengeance and all the things that this apparently individual being has. So that's why what we call ego, which seems to be identity, is based on a sensation of separation, and that sensation of separation is based on its own existence, based or rooted in the fact that it feels limited. So that's why we use these words. And the I thought is something that comes up naturally as we understand that its arising comes from thought, only from narratives. When that's not present, then it doesn't exist. And that's why when we look for it, we can't find it. We always see just narratives, memories, thoughts, something that is feeding this supposed entity that is not there. So you can see at this point how when we look into the nature of who we are and we dive deep into the question, who am I? And we stay there, we see that what I am is simply the container or the place or the space or the medium, the field in which everything arises and falls away. Even this I thought comes up And it always depends on thought. It always depends on the narrative. It can only exist through thought. If there is no thought, there is no I independent. There is just a feeling of being. And this feeling of being is engulfing all experience. It's not being affected by it. If it is being affected, you would bet that you're going to find that I thought present, taking the experience. Because when we go deeper and deeper into understanding what really is this ego, separate self, or I thought, what we find is that I like to call it tendency. There is just a tendency of our true self, awareness, to identify with a limited being based on experience. So this is due to attention being so focused on certain experiences, memories, or narratives that are in the mind. And they're very convincing because we have been rehearsing this for decades. And this tendency needs to be gently pulled back to its source. The tendency of attention, of awareness, going from its own being into the thought, the narrative, the story, we gently pull it back and let the narrative play. We're not disallowing any sort of narrative or story. We're not rejecting anything. We're simply returning attention to its source. So that tendency begins to weaken. And something magical happens here, because as you debilitate and weaken this tendency, you're going to see that that tendency, which is the cause of every other problem that we have, every other concern, every other worry, or any emotional state, will begin to weaken at the same time, all of them together. And this is what is felt as a more peaceful, equanimous being. So no longer do we have to go into particular stories of our lives, past traumas, or even people who claim from other incarnations that they bring stuff. All of this, it's not necessary to go specific to one of them and have different healing modalities to try to address all of them, because all of them are based on the same tendency of identifying with an individual being. Even a soul, even a spirit, is still a limited identity. And so what we do is that we put a bigger story into it, and we feel better with ourselves because we're not this human limited being, but just a bigger soul. Still, that's still compressed. That is still an individual. And as we weaken this tendency, a greater peace and a greater equanimity comes forth. And that's what everybody is looking for. So this sense of being an independent agent of reality begins to weaken simply by returning our attention back to its source. Because remember, what is it that attends experience? You. Who are you? When you look into it, you find that there's only a field, a space, a medium in which sensations of the body are felt and thoughts arise and fall away. Just like the sensations in the body, they vibrate, thoughts vibrate. You are that field in which everything appears. Anything else is form, is an individual entity, no matter how big it may be. It may be the size of the universe, this big soul. It is still limited. That's not who we are. And even that thought arises and falls away. And who remains? You. What you call you. So that is what attends experience. And it creates a tendency to certain stories and narratives. That's why you don't associate yourself to all stories and all narratives. Otherwise, if you read a book, you would associate yourself with that. But you know it's a story, and you put it back. You don't reject it. You just remember it's a story. It's something that I experience by reading it. Same thing here. Return attention back to its source and remain there, because that is the one that is bringing attention to the narrative. So that's the tendency, to quickly hook or latch onto whatever narrative is going to play that is very convincing and we feel relatable to it. Detach from it and allow it to be. And in that moment, you're weakening a tendency of all the other narratives that are there. Some may be stronger than others, and it doesn't matter, because you're weakening the one thing that is creating that hook to latch on to the experience. One last thing that I want to cover here is that there is a misconception that is thrown around superficially, never in the depths of a teaching, but superficially, that the ego is necessary to live. This is a problem for a lot of people who take it at face value. What people mean truly is that your individuality is obviously necessary to experience reality. So I want to make the distinction and tell you that the ego it's not necessary. Plus, it doesn't exist. So how could you need something that doesn't exist? When you look for it, it's not there. So what do people mean when they say this at heart? Some people may say it and they don't know it yet. But at heart, what they're saying is that your individual self, your spontaneous, authentic being is what is needed. How does this look? Let's first address the problem of saying the ego is necessary to live. I need my ego. This is false and it creates further problems. I'll tell you how. First, because we claim that the ego is necessary, you're going to justify unkind behaviors to others and yourself. Because guess what? The ego is necessary to live, right? So all my behaviors that are egotistical, well, I might as well just filter them through this need of the ego. You can see the first problem there. Subconsciously, people are doing this. Second thing is that those authentic behaviors, the things that I love doing, the things that I want to be of service with, well, those are part of the ego, so I may not enact on them. You see the second problem here? Not only are you maintaining unkind behaviors in yourself because the ego is necessary, right? But also the things that you love doing, that you would love to develop, that you would love to share with everybody, they may be part of the ego. So you see the confusion that is generated by this? How do we cut this through? Individuality is what you are. You are a spontaneous being. The way you behave, the way you act naturally does not need thought. You realize this the more you live within yourself and you see that everything is arising naturally. You don't have to do anything. Meaning the mind doesn't have to do anything. It only needs to receive and discern. That's the key word here. It is no longer about controlling. It's about discerning which behavior is more congruent with who I want to be. And that's it. Keep choosing whatever it is that is what you love doing and what you want to continue to do. It is that simple. And that discernment, the last thing, is that you don't do it. It happens naturally. Just like when you're going to help somebody in a emergency, you don't think about it. You don't think about all the possibilities and all the possible consequences. You go and do it immediately. It's a discernment that happens, and people would say, wow, you're a hero. And you would say, I have no idea why I did it. I just did it. Period. That same mechanism is within you. So this is how we pluck the ego out from our mind, and we understand it, and we begin to cause this discernment. That's it. Very simple. If you're not watching this on my community in school, if you're on YouTube, then I'll invite you to join my free community in school where you can watch more of this teaching, and everything's for free. You can go check it out so you can start practicing this to just simply dive into the question, who am I? See where it takes you, and then begin to discern and understand all these mental mechanics and dynamics that are happening naturally, especially weakening this ego through effortless meditation. You have my support there as well, and that's what I got for you. So As usual, I hope this video was very helpful, especially on this topic, which is very confusing for a lot of people. And remember, you cannot know the ego if you don't know who you are. Only the ego will be able to know the ego, and it'll just perpetuate itself. You have to know who you truly are. Hope you have a wonderful day. Hope to see you in school. And if not, I'll see you in the next video.